Hey, 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 good thinkers. Welcome to Good Thinking Live. For those of you new to the show, be sure to check into the chat and let us know who you are and where you're from. Those of you who are regular good thinkers, you know the drill. This is our about 30 minutes, most Monday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific time here in the United States, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, where we tune in on LinkedIn Live and on YouTube Live to spend about 30 minutes to set aside all the time that we are told what to think so we can think about our thinking, this whole metacognition, so we can work on improving how we think. So welcome. Let me know if you are here. We're going to get started. We have a lot of questions that we put to the audience, put to you all, put to this good thinking conversation, so that we can spend time with each other. All right. So Barkley, first in from Washington, D.C., the first good thinker onto the show. I didn't get the show event onto the LinkedIn Learning Hub, so we might be a little skinny on participants, but hopefully there'll be enough of you here where we can start to have a really good conversation. All right. As you know, we always start out with a question for the audience. So definitely participate and share. All right. What does it mean to forgive? Like, you may know intellectually, what does it mean to forgive? What word would you describe, or what word would you use to describe what it means to forgive? All right. So when you think of a word, and you think, okay, it means this, you're kind of thinking in your head. And there's two different ways of, when we think about metacognition, when we think about our thinking, there's two different ways of thinking. One, like, what do we know intellectually? What do we know? And then can you bring it into your body? Can you feel what it feels like to forgive? So two different questions. What does it mean to forgive? And how does it feel to forgive? Those two different kind of adjectives or whatever. How does it feel? It feels this. I'm going to say hi to Rajesh from the Kingdom of Bahrain. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Tuning in. Do we have, and I think we have some people in from YouTube too. So let us know. Stephen from Portland, Oregon. Jeffrey from Ontario, Canada. Pinkering, Ontario, Canada. Welcome, Jeffrey. Welcome, Stephen. Welcome, Rajesh. Barkley. Some other good thinkers coming onto the show. Definitely let us know who you are and where you're from. All right. What adjective would you use to describe what it feels like, and how you describe forgiving or to forgive? I'm going to say hi to Arvin from India and Stephen. We've got Steve from, let's see, we've got Steve. Wait, is that another person? Oh, is that another person from? We have another Ontario. This is from Toronto. Cool. Welcome, Steve. And Heather from Scottsdale, Arizona. Welcome, Heather. All right. Does anyone want to share? Keep them coming. Keep them coming. I love it. Does anyone want to share how you would describe in your head what forgiving is and what it feels like? And then here's the next question. You got to get this and put this into your head as we go through today's show. When you think of someone that you should forgive or have forgiven or shouldn't forgive, someone that forgiveness is even a relevant consideration, do you have someone in mind? And it could be someone personal. And if you can't find someone personal, it could be someone historical, like someone who did something that you want to think about forgiveness. I would never forgive them, or I would forgive someone for whom forgiveness is a relevant topic. Get that in your minds, and you can hold that in your mind, or hold them in your mind as we go through today's show. All right. So what is the difference between forgiving and forgetting? A lot of people say, I can forgive, but I can't forget. What is the difference there? Well, maybe forgiving, because forgiving does not mean that you put yourself in the place to be hurt again or be treated poorly again. Forgiving does not mean that at all. So when you think about that distinction, it doesn't mean forgetting to put yourself in that situation. What is the difference between forgiving and forgetting? All right, so we got some great answers. I want to bring some of your answers in the show. We've got Ian James from Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome. And we have Thomas. Oh, Guten Morgen from Dusseldorf, Germany. Good morning to you. All right, so here we go. Here is what forgive means to me. When you think of that offense, your energy is no longer sucked into that. The offense comes from others or yourself in the past. I'm going to give that definition, a rubber chicken. That is fantastic because a lot of that has to do with energy. And that will get to one of the questions that we come to later, which I will kind of give you a little hint at now. Who is the greatest beneficiary of your forgiving? You or the person you forgive? Who benefits most from forgiving? The forgiver or the forgiven? Who benefits most? Put it in the chat. Let's see what you think. Heather says, I believe forgiveness is an action and choice, not a feeling. Ooh, interesting. Another rubber chicken. Anyone who takes a stab at this, interesting. Adam says, our meeting conflict. Again, we'll have to catch the recording. Okay, no problem. You, Adam, great. We have meetings whenever. Definitely, if you're tuning in live, comment. But if you're tuning in after the show, comment too. We love your comments. All right. Jeffrey says, forgiveness is magnanimous and compassionate, but often difficult for many. Oh, totally. Is forgiveness compassion? If you think about the difference between compassion and empathy, I might think forgiveness is more toward could be seen as more toward empathy, more toward even intellectual empathy. And I'll get to why that shift can be helpful in a few minutes. All right, Arvin says, forgive, to let go of events, memories that are usually associated with negative emotions. All right, now Heather says, who is the beneficiary? The forgiver, you, or the forgiven? And Heather says, you. Ian says, you. Stephen says, surprisingly, yourself. And I completely agree. And there's some really interesting neuroscientific evidence to support that, which is why the next question may even shed more light on this little tricky fact, which is, does the person you forgive even have to know you've forgiven them? How important is it? I guess that can't always be if you're forgiving someone from history. So when you think about forgiveness and you think about whether it's a requirement that that person that you forgive even is aware of that, does a person need to be aware that they were forgiven for forgiveness to have the beneficial effect? Yes or no? All right. So Heather says, love that. Empathetic empathy. And I even think intellectual empathy, not even the kind of the emotional, but just the intellectual empathy. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes during the show. All right. Yeah. So different compassion and intellectual empathy, very different. I'm going to take the banner away from here so we have more room for your great comments. There we go. All right. So what do you do if you know intellectually that you should forgive? You now know that the benefit is to you. Now, does the person have to know? Maybe not even the person doesn't even have to know, but you can't actually feel forgiveness in your body. That's what we're going to try to do so that by the end of today, you'll have some tools where even if intellectually you know that you should forgive and you just can't feel it in your body, maybe some of these things from today will help you. All right. Here's my question about the way you feel when you don't forgive, like before you forgive. I mean, the way that even makes forgiving relevant. What's more useful? And these things all can be useful. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't feel them. I mean, even if it's a short period of time, what's more useful? Anger or hatred? Anger or hatred? Which is more useful? All right. So yeah, sorry. Yeah, Heather, you meant intellectual empathy. All right, good. But empathetic empathy is a different kind of thing. It's kind of the emotional empathy. So intellectual empathy. Barclay says, there are benefits to forgiving, but many maybe detriments to trying to forgive when you're unable to. Ooh, that's interesting. When you try to forgive, but you can't, is it better just not to try at all? Ooh, interesting. What do you think? Should you keep trying? Is trying but not being successful? That's an interesting, I hadn't really thought about that. But I think that some of the ways to think about forgiveness in a different way might be helpful with that. All right, Heather says, absolutely not. Can forgive without ever saying a word to the person or person. I'm going to totally agree with you. I think that's why, even if you are hung up on historical, and I mean, a lot of our collective anger, particularly in geopolitical types of situations, come from historical grudges, hating and anger from things that happened, to our ancestors or people for whom we feel an affinity. And so we hold those, those that generational hatred and that generational anger can be the cause of many of our geopolitical and historical and all the things that frustrate us now. Like, oh, that was fighting over land or whatever. These kinds of grudges have generational effects and also have physiological effects from generation to generation, which we will get in. All right. Disagree. Unforgiving is an act against oneself. Heather, I'm really liking your comments today because they're kind of foreshadowing some of the things that we're going to talk about. Hatred is malignant. Anger can be useful if the energy is transposed efficiently. Fantastic, Jeffrey. I totally agree. And there is a lot of evidence as we are getting more and closer to kind of seeing how the brain functions and how our stress hormones and all the marriage between our our immunology and our psychiatry and our neurology, as these kind of three separate classes or areas of medicine kind of get closer and closer together. I think we're going to find that that's a really good point. Okay, so Heather says, you cannot control others, but you release yourself from another when you forgive. Again, it's not an act. It's an act, not waiting for the feeling to come. It's an act. Aha. And can the act create the feeling? It may never come, but you choose to forgive and release yourself from it. Fantastic. I love that. I love that. So anger is okay. Anger can spur you to awareness, and if you can do something about it, you can change. Hatred is toxic, and it's mostly, not all, but mostly useless, especially because it can be durable. And that durable aspect of hatred is when it starts to have a really negative effect on you, way more negative than on the person that you're, no matter what you do. So with hatred, you actually become less capable as a person. You might even be less accurate in your judgments, not just about that direct result of hate, but to people who maybe not even nothing to do with who you hate. You're less accurate in your day-to-day judgments, even for people that you love. So it can be a very debilitating. And we know that over time, these stress hormones that come from this hatred can lead to increased inflammation throughout the body, resulting in significant health consequences. So how miserable do you have to be to solve your problems? If someone has done you wrong, and maybe it's someone you know, or maybe you think back to history and it's a group of people, and you think to yourself, these people have done me wrong, or these people are doing me wrong, or this government is doing me wrong, or this group of people, how miserable do you have to be to solve your problems? And how miserable do others have to be to solve your problem of anger or resentment? So does making someone miserable who you cannot forgive, does that help you solve your problems? And how much does it help you solve your problems? All right, we're going to say, okay, we've got LinkedIn. Maybe I don't know who this is, but sometimes it doesn't say on LinkedIn, but if one is not in a space to forgive, turn it over to what one considers their higher power and keep it moving. Okay, that's going to get into some of the ways we think about forgiveness, some of the tools we have. And one of them is spirituality or religion. And there's some other tools. So Barclay says, is it possible to make the choice to forgive but still fail to forgive? Aha. What does it look like when you make the choice to forgive, but you don't feel it? I think that it helps that might lead to frustration, but I think you have to first make the choice. And then we're going to get into some of the ways that you might be able to actually make the head and the feeling of forgiveness kind of meld. All right. What about forgiving yourself? How do you forgive yourself? How do you apologize to yourself? Do you forgive yourself? You can regret and feel bad about an outcome so you can learn, but how long should you stew in regret? Is there a time frame where you should stew in regret? Does it help? Does it make anything right for you to stew in regret. All right. So whether you're forgiving someone you know, or you're forgiving someone from history, or you're forgiving a collective group, I'm just getting, hold on. No, I do not want this to start now. I'm getting do you want to update and restart your computer? No, not in the middle of good thinking. I don't think that's a good idea. LinkedIn, I think that fail to forgive means that one continues to hold the wrong. Yeah, but sometimes you should forgive, but you can't feel it. But how long should you stew? Is there a specific time that you think it's not okay for me to forgive myself yet? I haven't done X and Y and Z. And that gets to some of these traditions, whether they're religious traditions or recovery traditions or these traditions we use. I'm going to give a new one today. I think not a new one, but one that I think is kind of different that might help. So what constitutes an effective apology? Let's just get into the elements of apology. And what I want to do is talk about like the science. There's a lot of research, and particularly when I went to the International Society for Judgment Decision Making this year, it was an online thing. And I was really interested to see every year they come up with like different ways of assessing what constitutes an apology. And maybe it would be like an online apology because you have a bad review on Yelp or something like that, all the way to kind of more substantive apologies. And so I'm curious what you think about what constitutes an effective apology. So I'll give you kind of two things and you tell me, yeah, A should be in there and B is not necessary, or other way around. All right, you ready? Okay, how about this? You have either an explanation of negative impact, like, ooh, I see how this negatively impacted you, or an admission of a mistake. Do you have to admit the mistake, or do you just have to acknowledge the negative impact? So admit the mistake would be A, acknowledge the impact, B. Do you have to do, which one really do you feel needs to be in there for an effective apology? All right, that's number one. Number two, what about an expression of regret? Like, I regret this happened to you. Or an expression of sorrow. I'm sorry that this happened to you. Slight difference. What feels like a more effective apology to you? I regret that this happened to you. I'm sorry that this happened to you. All right. So Barclay says, I think stewing in regret should end when the lesson is fully learned. Okay, great. And so that's really, how do you learn a lesson from a mistake? Ooh, I like that. What do you think about that as a future good thinking topic? I think that's good. There's not a time frame. It's kind of great. So Arvin says B. So Arvin says on number one, you need an explanation of negative impact or an admission of a mistake. So I don't think, I'm sorry, I'm kind of mixing these up, A and B. I don't think A and B are mutually exclusive. Aha. But if you had to, I think you might be right about that. That's good. Good point. Always good points from these good thinkers. But if you had to pick what feels like more of an effective apology, and how about this one? An offer of repair or a declaration of remorse. Like if you say, and you'll see some of these because I'm pitting two things against each other. So I am so sorry this happened to you. I have remorse. I feel awful about that. Or let me make that right. Now, obviously, both are really good, but let's just say you have one or the other. What's more important? Acknowledgement of remorse or an offer of repair? All right. So let's get some ones in here. Let's see. Diamantino, we can always forgive and not forget, but not to the expense of our well-being, but as lessons learned. Fantastic. All right. So Steve says, admit the wrong. B is also good to follow. It is also good to follow A. Absolutely. All of these ingredients that I'm telling you these are all ingredients of an effective apology. But, like, let's say you're making cookies and you put in, you need eggs and this and that. You could put in a dollop of jam, but it's not necessary. Which are the eggs and which are the dollops of jam? What do you need for an apology to be effective? Obviously, the more you have of these, it could seem good. But actually, there's some interesting research that sometimes an acknowledgement, sometimes offering repair can backfire. And sometimes acknowledging remorse can backfire and repair should be better. So there's really interesting situations about forgiveness because it also depends on why you're having to forgive someone in the first place. All right. So remorse is hopefully more empathetic and healing. Excellent. Repair. I think if there's a financial kind of element, repair. Let's see, an offer of repair in certain situations, agree. Heather says repair must be agreed upon and wrongdoer driven. That's a really good point, because if I offer you, let's say I do something, let's say I borrow your car and I am texting while driving and I crash your car. And I say, I'd like to offer repair. Your car's a little scratched up to begin with. And, I think I'd like to offer you $100. And you're like, what? I mean, the repair. So yeah, it does have to be wrongdoer given. But what if you can't repair it? And it's wonderful to have the offender feel true emotion. So I think repair becomes, or I'm sorry, I cheated on you or lied to you. I'd like to pay you $20. It definitely is. I don't think repair is necessary for an effective apology, but there might be situations where it's definitely beneficial. Now, the last two we're going to pit against each other. So we say here, you need to be earnest in your apology. I will tell you that there's some really interesting research around that. I'm glad you said that, because there's some interesting research around that, which is people have a very hard time, whether it's compliments or a sincerity, people don't have as easy a time determining sincerity as we think we do. We humans are not that great. Now, obviously, if someone's wildly insincere, yes, but where someone is a good actor, we have a really hard time deciphering insincerity. It's just a thing. It's just a thing. So I'm not sure. So if you are earnest in your apology, you probably would come across as sincere, but I think you could also come across as sincere, which would make it an effective policy if you weren't earnest and you were just a good actor, for example. All right. Heather's, oh, good. Someone's saying, Heather, you're referring to forgiveness and reconciliation. You don't need reconciliation for forgiveness. You don't need reconciliation for forgiveness. But I was asking a question about, that's why repair can have an historical implication too. There can be that too. So yeah, I think you're right, but I think it gets tricky. It gets tricky in there. All right. The one who feels wrong wants the other person to pay for the wrong. It doesn't always happen. That's true. All right. Here's the last one. And then we're going to get into some of this other stuff I think you're going to find really interesting. Do you think that an effective apology requires a request for forgiveness or no request for forgiveness? Does an effective apology require a request for forgiveness? What do you think? Does it or does it not? All right. As you are thinking about that, because some people are streaming at different times. And so some of the things, the nature of live streams, conversations. Let's see. Renee says, a living amends where a person is sincerely apologized and their behaviors change in the future. Aha. Sincerely apologized. And that means that forgiveness requires the certain kind of behavior on the part of the forgiven. And yet most of you think that forgiveness benefits the forgiver more than the forgiven. All right, here is an example of a sincere apology. I apologize, but. Oh yeah, I apologize, but. What do they say? If you say something like that, and I don't think this is totally true, but like anything you say before the but, you can kind of dismiss. I don't mean to hurt your feelings, but you can kind of dismiss everything that comes before I don't mean to hurt your feelings. What do you think about that? I think that's fun. Okay, so let's get it. Do you need to ask for forgiveness, request forgiveness or not? Is that required for an effective apology? All right, so we're just going to bring in some of these. It gets tricky when talking about forgiveness and reconciliation from a historic point of view. Okay, Nadine. Good, thank you. I don't know why it's not appearing. It's just weird sometimes the way the LinkedIn works. I don't know. Maybe if you're not following me or something on LinkedIn, I don't know. Okay, so Heather says, I asked to be forgiven, but unsure if that's common or typical. Interested to hear from others. I know, I wonder. I'm going to take a stab. I don't think you need to be forgiven to forgive. So that gets a little weird. Because if the benefit is to the person that's forgiven, then or forgiving, not forgiven, not the benefit, not to the person forgiven, but the benefit is to the forgiver. Sorry for that. If the benefit is to the forgiver, then asking that forgiver to give you that benefit is not necessary. Like if you are the one forgiving, do you need to be asked Do you need to be asked? No, because the benefit is to you. You shouldn't have to wait to be asked to get that benefit, right? All right, just a thought. I don't know. So Barclay says, I don't think it's required, but but what makes an apology effective? Is it forgiveness? And if one is listening, you'll hear it. Effective apology requires no request for forgiveness. It should stand alone. Paul, I kind of agree. Renee says you don't need to ask for forgiveness, but remain hopeful that forgiveness will come. Yes. Okay. So now we know that we're going to go quickly through kind of the traditional, how you embrace forgiveness. And you can put it in the chat if you're brave. You can share it in the chat. Like we were all together here, like we are. How do you embrace forgiveness? Do you use a religious tradition? So some people say, I have a religious tradition that tells me how to forgive. We know that forgiveness is so important to the forgiver that we actually have traditions that, why not get the benefit? Or do you borrow from the recovery steps? Maybe AA or Alcoholics Anonymous or some of these recovery steps that also have a religious tradition. But I'm talking about, like, do you have a specific religious tradition that you follow? And there's an interesting difference between like the monotheistic religions. They all have a different take on forgiveness, which are kind of fun. I mean, not that everyone agrees, but in general, do you embrace a humanist philosophy, like recognizing that every person is unique and irreplaceable and special? What about science? So you got religion, you got recovery that you borrow from maybe, or embracing the humanistic philosophy, or maybe science. And I'm going to get into a little bit of the science for the last part of it, so we can get to the whole point is how can we what are tools can we use to rethink forgiveness? Now, I'm running out of time, but I was going to do a little thought experiment. But when you think about forgiving, like if someone cuts you off in the car and you're furious at that person because they almost caused an accident. This actually happened to me in Las Vegas. I was there for a consumer electronics show. We were driving in a car, and I was in an Uber, and this car kept cutting us off. And I was like, what is that car? I was feeling angry. And then I looked over, and there was a person in the passenger seat, but there was no one in the driver's seat. It was a totally autonomous vehicle. And I thought, who do I forgive? This poor person that's driving this car, that's not riding in this car. Who am I even angry at? Am I angry? And I can't remember the company, but it was, it was at the Consumer Electronics Show. So there was a lot of whizzy technology going on at that time. And, who do you blame if an autonomous vehicle? Do you blame the manufacturer? Do you blame Elon Musk if it's an autonomous Tesla? I mean, it gets a little weird when, who do you blame if you're struck by lightning? You might have a religious tradition that says, I'm going to blame this, or I didn't do this. Or I blame myself because I didn't do this. But I mean, when you start to think about all the ways that you can forgive people, places, things, or historical events or historical people, it gets a little weird. But that was going to be the thought experiment. I was going to give you a couple of different things. And like, how would you think about forgiveness here? And how would you think about forgiveness here? Like, how would you think about forgiving a terrorist that caused harm to someone you love versus someone who causes harm to someone you love, versus you versus you who causes harm to someone you love? How do you think about forgiveness there? All right. So we're going to get into how to forgive because we only have a few more minutes. We'll go a few minutes over. One is I'm going to get the kind of the three major ones that people talk about a lot. And then I'm going to do the fourth one rather, that I think is a little bit more like in the good thinking, wow realm. Okay. Number one, imagine the innocent child. And this is hard when you're working with a collective group of people that you don't forgive, like in geopolitical historical events where you can't collectively forgive a group of people. And that's why I think a lot of that anger and that holding grudges over time and over history for collective anger is really not useful. It's probably one of our biggest flaws as a human species. But imagining the innocent child. And it's very difficult to imagine the innocent child collectively of a group of people with whom you hold a grudge for, thousands of years, or for wrongdoings for 50 years or 100 years or thousands of years. Number one, you practice. You have to practice. And it's hard to forgive if you don't practice. So you could practice on little tiny things that are easy, where you say, I wouldn't even consider forgiving that person. I don't even care. Like maybe the grocery store clerk or whatever rang up a bunch of extra groceries because they weren't paying attention, or someone bumped you in the line, or someone cut you in a queue. Little things. You can practice little tiny acts of forgiveness, and then you can practice it on yourself. And most of us tend to be harder on ourselves than we are on others. Not everyone. Not everyone. How many of you were harder on yourself, forgiving yourself, than you are on others? I think it's easy to say, oh, I'm harder on myself. I don't think I'm harder on forgiving myself than I am on others. I think I tend to justify in my mind, I feel, I try not to do things that, at least when I justify, I can't justify. So, I think I'm just going to admit it. I think I might be harder on others sometimes than I am on myself. But practice on yourself. And then the last one, and this is one that I probably could do a whole good thinking on. And if you are interested in this, as a separate episode, let me know. And let me know by putting the words free will in the chat. If you're interested in this next one, let me know. Open yourself up to reconsidering the notion of free will. We know so much about our bacteria in our guts, our microbiomes. We know so many instances of people having organic causes for really egregious behavior, but we're just at the very precipice, the very beginning of looking at organic causes, whether it's a bacteria or a virus that causes, a complete change in behavior, or something that seems violent, or something that is violent, or brain tumors, or all kinds of things that our human bodies are subject to, genetics, environment, whatever. Not just like, you had you were, maybe had a rough upbringing and that caused you to go out and do bad things. But we still think of all of these things as ultimately down to a choice we make. And it's a very tricky topic, this whole notion of free will. But if you really understand and start looking at what we're learning about the role of bacteria, for example, on our neurochemicals, the role of bacteria on our behavior, the role of bacteria on our stress hormones, and even just when I mean that, I mean like the stuff you eat, like the stuff you grew up eating and the stuff. And they've even done transplants of rats where they've taken the gut biome of one group of rats and then another and swapped it out and seen complete behavior changes with nothing else change. So we know that there are all these things that are playing a part in our behavior, that if you think about what would happen if at every criminal trial there was a complete medical examination, and that if there was some organic something that caused or could be the cause of some criminal behavior, and that was curable, you might think, well, why should that person get cured? Well, think about society. If we were able to find organic or neurochemical or things that are not just like this kind of magical thinking choices that we make as a cause of the behavior, think about the role of forgiveness. Think about how you would think about forgiveness if you found out that the person that you could never forgive was behaving that way because of a brain tumor. Think about how different that forgiveness is. And I can tell you straight out, for those of you who stayed for the longer part of this, is my mother died of a brain tumor. And for years, I blamed her erratic behavior, which was not like her, on something like she was mad at me, or she wasn't patient, or I don't even know what. And the minute we found out she had a brain tumor, it changed my relationship with forgiveness forever. So this role of free will, this role of all the things that make us do what we do, just being open to that collectively. I mean, we don't know what was going on 2,000 years ago, the kinds of environmental impacts that made people do what they do. We certainly don't know about it today, but we're learning. And that questioning can make us change our relationship with forgiveness, which is great because we're the ones that benefit when we do forgive. So I will not be here next Monday, August 1st, because we have an exciting wedding in our family. But I will be back on August 8th. So put it in your calendar. We want everyone to be back joining Good Thinking to grow this community of worldwide good thinkers. Thank you so much for staying a little long. Thank you for being here. We've got a couple interests in free will, so we'll do that. Arvin, if anyone else is interested, I need a few more people because some people are like, I don't know if I want to deal with that. Heather, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jeffrey. And everyone have a great week. See ya on the 8th.